They beat an old rancher in front of his son. The boy came back with 400 Apache warriors. Cassidy Flynn's hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The blood on his shirt wasn't his. The house behind him stood with its door hanging off the hinges. And inside, his father lay on the floor, breathing in short, painful gasps. 3 hours ago, everything had been normal. 3 hours ago, he'd been fixing the fence near the creek. Then the riders came, 7 of them. They didn't ask twice. When Gideon Flynn said no, they made sure he understood what no meant in their world. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that some debts run deeper than blood. And Cassidy was about to collect one. 2 days earlier, Gideon had been standing at the edge of their property, watching the horizon like he always did when something felt wrong. Cassidy had learned to read his father's silences. The old man didn't talk much, but his body spoke volumes. The way he held his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his jaws set when he was thinking about the past. Gideon had been a rancher for 40 years, raising cattle on land that stretched from the cottonwoods to the red hills. Simple work, honest work. But lately, men had been coming around. Men in clean clothes, with dirty intentions. They wanted the land. They said the territory was changing, that small ranchers like. Gideon needed to sell before they lost everything. Anyway, Gideon told them the same thing every time. This land wasn't for sale. Not to them, not to anyone. Cassidy had been 16 when he first understood that his father wasn't like other men. Most ranchers kept their distance from the Apache tribes that moved through the territory. They traded sometimes, kept an uneasy peace, but never trust, never friendship. Gideon was different. Once a year, sometimes twice, riders would come to the ranch. Not cowboys, Apache warriors. They would sit with Gideon for hours, sharing food, speaking in low voices. Cassidy never understood the words, but he understood the respect. These men looked at his father the way people looked at legends. When the riders came that morning, Cassidy had been working near the creek, close enough to hear the horses, but too far to do anything. He heard his father's voice, steady and firm. Heard the other voices, hard and mocking. Then he heard the first impact, the sound of bone meeting wood, his father's grunt. Cassidy started running, but by the time he reached the house, there were 2. Many of them. A man with a scar across his cheek grabbed Cassidy by the collar and threw him to the ground. Another one laughed. The leader, a man with cold eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, stood over Gideon, who was on his knees, blood running from his mouth. The man spoke slowly like he was explaining something to a child. Gideon had 1 week to reconsider, 1 week to sign the papers. If he didn't, they'd come back and finish what they started. Then they rode away, leaving Cassidy kneeling beside his father in the dirt. Gideon's breathing was shallow now. His ribs were broken, maybe worse. Cassidy had gotten him inside onto the floor near the fireplace, but he didn't know what else to do. His father's eyes found his, and for the first time in Cassidy's life, he saw something that terrified him. Not pain, not fear, resignation. Gideon thought this was the end, but Cassidy remembered the Apache warriors. He remembered the way they looked at his father, and he remembered something Gideon had told him once years ago after too much whiskey by the fire. A story about a boy caught in a flash flood. A boy Gideon had pulled from the water and carried back to his people. A boy who grew up to be a leader. Cassidy stood, his decision made. His father tried to speak, tried to stop him, but Cassidy was already moving. He grabbed his horse, threw on a saddle, and stuffed his saddlebag with dried meat and water. The Apache camp was 2 days' ride northeast through territory most men wouldn't cross alone. But Cassidy wasn't most men. Not anymore. He looked back at the house one last time, at his father's broken body barely visible through the doorway. Then he turned his horse toward the hills and rode. What he didn't know was that the men who beat his father were already planning their return. And what they didn't know was that Cassidy Flynn was about to bring back something they couldn't fight, couldn't buy, and couldn't survive. The first night, Cassidy didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face, blood running down his chin, ribs cave in from the boots that kept coming. The image burned behind his eyelids like a brand. He pushed his horse hard through the afternoon, racing against time he didn't have. Gideon needed help, real help. A doctor, medicine, rest. But doctors cost money. And even if Cassidy rode back to town, by the time he returned with help, it might be too late. The only chance his father had was if those men never came back. And the only way to guarantee that was to make them too afraid to return. The terrain changed as he rode northeast. The grasslands gave way to rocky hills, then to narrow passages, between stone walls that seemed to close in around him. This was Apache territory. Most settlers avoided it, spoke about it in whispers, told stories about men who rode in and never rode out. But Cassidy had been here before. Years ago, with his father. He remembered the landmarks, the split boulder that looked like a broken tooth, the creek that ran red with clay, the cottonwood growing sideways out of the cliff face. By the second morning, his water was running low. His horse was exhausted, foam gathering at the corners of its mouth. Cassidy knew he was pushing too hard, but he couldn't stop. Every hour he spent out here was an hour closer to those men returning to finish what they started. He thought about the leader with the cold eyes and trim beard, the way he'd stood over Gideon, speaking slowly, enjoying every word. Men like that didn't make empty threats. They came back. They always came back. He found the first sign of the Apache camp just afternoon. Smoke thin and careful rising from behind a ridge. Then tracks fresh leading toward the eastern hills. Cassid's heart hammered in his chest. He was close, but being close to an Apache camp uninvited was a good way to end up with an arrow in your back. He slowed his horse, raised one hand in the air, and waited. The minutes stretched out. His hand started to ache from holding it up, but he didn't lower it. This was how his father had taught him. Show respect. Show you mean no harm. Wait for them to come to you. The warrior appeared so quietly that Cassid's horse startled. He was young, maybe 20, with a rifle across his back and a knife at his belt. He looked at Cassidy for a long moment, eyes moving from his raised hand to his exhausted horse to the dried blood still visible on his shirt. Then he spoke, words Cassidy didn't understand. Cassidy swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to remember the few Apache words his father had taught him, but his mind was blank with exhaustion and fear. Instead, he said the only name that mattered. Naten. I need to see Naten. The warrior's expression changed. Not much, just a slight shift around the eyes. Recognition. He gestured for Cassidy to follow, then turned and started walking. Cassidy climbed down from his horse, legs shaking, and followed on foot. They walked for 20 minutes through passages Cassidy would never have found alone. Then the camp opened up before him. Dozens of shelters, horses grazing, children playing, women working, and in the center, standing beside a fire, was a man Cassidy had seen only once before. Years ago, taller than most, with gray beginning to show in his hair and scars crossing his arms like a map of old battles. Naten turned, saw Cassidy, and his face went very still. He knew something was wrong. He knew Cassidy wouldn't be here unless everything had gone to pieces. And in that moment, before Cassidy even spoke, the leader of 400 warriors already understood that debt from the past was about to be called in. Naten didn't move. He just watched as Cassidy walked closer, stumbling slightly, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The camp had gone quiet. Children stopped playing. Women paused their work. Warriors appeared from shelters, hands near weapons, eyes fixed on the white boy covered in dust and blood. Cassidy stopped 10 feet from Naten, close enough to speak, far enough to show respect. His voice cracked when he finally found the words. They beat him. My father. 7 men came to our ranch 2 days ago. They wanted him to sell the land. He refused, so they beat him in front of me until he couldn't. Stunt. Naten's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Cassidy pressed on, words spilling out faster now. His ribs are broken. Maybe worse. I got him inside, but I don't know if he'll survive the Weak. The men who did this, they're coming back. They said they'd finish what they started if he doesn't sign. Over the land. One of the younger warriors spoke in Apache, his tone sharp, questioning. Natan raised a hand, silencing him without looking away from Cassidy. When he finally spoke, his English was careful, each word chosen, with precision. Your father saved my son, pulled him from a flood when the spring waters came fast, carried him back to us when he could barely breathe. We do not forget deaths like that. Cassidy's legs nearly gave out with relief. But Natan wasn't finished. But you asked for war. 7 men, you said, maybe more behind them. If we ride to your land, if we stand against these men, there will be consequences. Not just for us, for your father, for you. They're already coming back, Cassidy said, and he couldn't keep the desperation out of his voice. In 5 days, maybe less. If they find him still alive, they'll kill him. I know they will. I saw it in their eyes. Natan turned away, staring into the fire. The silence stretched out so long that Cassidy thought he'd failed, thought he'd ridden 2 days for nothing. Then Natan spoke again, this time in Apache, his voice carrying across the camp. Warriors stepped forward, one, then another, then a dozen. They formed a line behind their leader. Faces hard, ready. Natan, switch back to English. We ride at dawn. But understand this, boy. Once we do this, once we show our strength, those men will know the Apache stand with your family. That protection comes with a price. Respect, honor. Your father understands these things. Do you? Cassidy nodded, not trusting his voice. Natan studied him for another long moment, then gestured to one of the women. He needs food and rest. His horse needs water. Then to Cassidy, you ride with us tomorrow. You brought this to our door. You'll see it through to the end. That night, Cassidy lay on a blanket near the fire, listening to the sounds of the camp, preparing for war. Warriors checked weapons, sharpened blades, spoke in low voices about what was coming. He counted them as they moved through the firelight. 50, 100 more kept arriving through the night, called in from hunting parties, from distant camps, from places Cassidy couldn't name. By the time the stars began to fade, he'd stopped counting. There were too many. When dawn broke and Natan gave the signal to move, Cassidy mounted his horse and looked back at the camp one last time. The shelters were already being dismantled. The fires were going out. And behind him, stretching back into the hills like a flood of muscle and determination, rode 400 Apache warriors. The men who'd beaten his father had 5 days to enjoy their victory. That time was almost up. They rode hard for 2 days, stopping only when the horses needed rest. Cassidy stayed near the front beside Natan, watching the landscape change from rocky hills back to grassland. 400 warriors moved, with a silence that defied their numbers. No shouting, no war cries, just the steady thunder of hooves and the occasional hand signal from Natan directing the formation. Cassidy had expected chaos, but this was disciplined, strategic. These men had fought together before, and it showed in every movement. On the second night, they camped within sight of the Flynn Ranch. Cassidy could see the outline of the house against the darkening sky, the broken door still hanging at an angle. His chest tightened. Was his father still alive in there? Still breathing? He started to move toward the house, but Natan's hand caught his shoulder. Not yet. We wait until morning. Your father has survived this long. A few more hours won't change that. But if we move now in the dark, we might miss the men who did this when they return. Cassidy wanted to argue, wanted to run to the house and check on Gideon. But he knew Natan was right. The plan only worked if they were here. But when Harlan Briggs and his men came back, he nodded, swallowing the fear that threatened to choke him. That night, he barely slept, staring at the house, willing his father to hold on just a little longer. Dawn came cold and gray. Natan positioned his warriors in a wide circle around the ranch, hidden behind rocks in creek beds along the tree and from the house. You'd never know. They were there. It was only when you looked closely, when you knew what to watch for, that you could see the glint of a rifle barrel, The shadow of a man crouched low in the grass. Cassidy was allowed to approach the house finally, with two warriors beside him for protection. Inside, Gideon lay exactly where Cassidy had left him, but he was conscious. His eyes opened when he heard footsteps, and for a moment, fear crossed his face. Then he saw his son, and something like relief softened the pain in his expression. "You fool," Gideon whispered, his voice barely audible. "You went to them. They're here, P. All of them." Natin brought 400 warriors. Gideon closed his eyes. "That many. God help us, Cassidy. Do you understand what this means?" Before Cassidy could answer, one of the warriors made a sharp sound. Riders, approaching from the east. Cassidy moved to the window, peering through the broken shutter. 7 horses, the same. Men who'd beaten his father. They rode slowly, confidently, like they owned the place already. The leader with the cold eyes and trimmed beard was in front, and he was smiling. Cassidy felt his hands curl into fists. These men had no idea what was waiting for them. They thought they were coming back to finish breaking an old man and claim his land. They thought they were in control. Outside, hidden in the grass and rocks and trees, 400 Apache warriors watched them approach. Natin had given strict orders. Wait until they dismount. Wait until they're close to the house. Wait until there's no escape. The 7 riders reached the yard and stopped. The leader swung down from his horse, brushing dust from his coat. He called out, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Flynn, time's up, old man. Hope you had time to think about our offer. We're here to collect your answer." Cassidy watched from the window as the man walked toward the house, his 6 companions spreading out behind him. They were 20 feet away. 15, 10. Close enough now that Cassidy could see the arrogance in their eyes, the casual cruelty in their smiles. They had no idea that every step brought them closer to a reckoning they couldn't escape. And then, as if the earth itself had decided to rise against them, 400 warriors stood up from their hiding places, surrounding the 7 men in a perfect, unbreakable circle. The change in the air was instant. One moment, the 7 men were walking confidently toward the house. The next, they were frozen in place, surrounded by more rifles than they could count. The leader's smile vanished. His hand moved toward his pistol, then stopped when he realized how useless it would be. 400 weapons were trained on him and his men. One wrong move, and they'd be cut down before they cleared leather. Natin stepped forward from the circle, walking slowly, deliberately. He stopped 10 feet from the leader, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You beat an old man. You threatened to kill him if he didn't give you his land. You thought he was alone. You thought he was weak." The leader's eyes darted around, calculating odds that didn't exist. His face had gone pale, but he tried to maintain composure. "This is between us and Flynn. This doesn't concern you or your people. You made it our concern when you touched a man who saved my son's life." Natin's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "A debt like that is sacred. You wouldn't understand that. Men like you don't understand honor." One the other. Riders, the one with the scar across his cheek, made a sudden movement toward his rifle. 3 arrows hit the ground at his feet before he could complete the motion, fired so fast and so precisely that the message was unmistakable. The next ones wouldn't miss. He raised his hands slowly, carefully. Cassidy stepped out of the house, his father's rifle in his hands. Gideon had tried to stop him, tried to keep him inside, but Cassidy needed to see this, needed these men to see him. The leader's eyes found Cassidy, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, understanding. The boy had done this. The boy they dismissed as harmless had brought an army down on their heads. "Your father has 1 week to leave," the leader said, trying one last time to assert control. "That was the deal. We'll come back." "No," Natin cut him off. "You won't. You'll leave now, and you won't return. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. Because if you do, if any of you come within sight of this ranch again, you won't leave alive." The threat hung in the air, absolute and final. The leader opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time, Cassidy saw real fear in those cold eyes. Fear and something worse. The humiliation of being utterly, completely outmatched. "You can't stay here forever," the leader said quietly. But the conviction was gone from his voice. "Eventually, you'll leave. And when you do," Naten smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "You think this ends when we ride away? You think we're just here for today?" He gestured to the warriors around him. "These men will remember your faces. If anything happens to Gideon, Flynn, if he has an accident, if his house burns down, if he disappears, we will know, and we will come for you. Not 400 of us. All of us. Every warrior from every camp. We will hunt you across this territory until there's nowhere left to hide." The silence that followed was total. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The leader looked at his men, then back at Natan. The calculation was simple. Pride versus survival. Greed versus the certainty of death. It took him less than 5 seconds to choose. "Mount up," he said to his men, his voice barely above a whisper. They climbed back on their horses slowly, hands visible, movements careful. The circle of warriors parted, creating a path eastward away from the ranch. The 7 riders moved through the gap, and Cassidy watched them go, watched them ride faster and faster until they were nothing but dust on the horizon. But even as they disappeared, he knew this wasn't quite over because men like Harlan Briggs didn't forgive humiliation easily. And somewhere out there beyond the hills, they were already deciding what came next. Natan's warriors stayed for 3 days. They set up camp around the ranch, posting guards and shifts, watching every approach. Cassidy learned that this wasn't just protection. It was a message. Anyone passing by would see the Apache presence and understand that the Flynn Ranch was under their shield. Word would spread fast. By the end of the week, every settler, every trader, every opportunist within 50 miles would know what happened here. Inside the house, 2 Apache women tended to Gideon. They worked with herbs and wrappings, setting his broken ribs with careful precision. Cassidy watched them work, amazed by their knowledge. His father drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time he woke, he seemed a little stronger. On the 2nd day, he managed to sit up. On the 3rd, he spoke in full sentences. "You took a hell of a risk," Gideon said to Cassidy that evening, his voice still rough with pain. "Riding alone to their camp. You could have been killed before you got close enough to speak. I didn't have a choice, P. They were going to come back and finish you." Gideon nodded slowly. "Natan, tell you what happens now." Cassidy shook his head. Gideon looked toward the door where Natan stood talking with several warriors. "We're bound to them now, more than before. This wasn't just one man saving a child. This was a tribe going to war for us. That kind of debt doesn't get paid back with a handshake and a thank you." Before Cassidy could ask what that meant, one of the guards outside gave a sharp whistle. Riders approaching. Not 7 this time, just 1. Natan moved to the window, rifle ready. Cassidy recognized the horse before he recognized the rider. It was one of Briggs's men, the youngest one, probably not even 20. He rode slowly, hands visible and empty, a white cloth tied to his saddle horn. Natan stepped outside, and Cassidy followed. The young rider stopped 30 feet from the house, eyes wide at the number of warriors surrounding him. He swallowed hard, then spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here with a message from Harlan Briggs." "Then deliver it and leave," Tuns said. The rider nodded quickly. "Mr. Briggs wants you to know that he's leaving the territory, him and the others. They're heading east back where they came from. He said to tell you that he understands the arrangement and that the Flynn Ranch will be left alone." Cassidy felt a surge of relief, but Natan's expression didn't change. "Why should we believe him?" The young rider shifted in his saddle, uncomfortable because the man who hired us, the one who wanted this land, he's dead, died 2 days ago. Heart gave out when he heard what happened here. Without him, there's no money, no reason to stay. Briggs just wants to get out with his life." Natan studied the rider for a long moment, then nodded once. Go. Tell Briggs that if he's lying, if any harm comes to this family, we'll find him. East or west, north or south, we'll find him." The rider turned his horse and rode away fast, the white cloth snapping in the wind. Cassidy turned too, Natan, questions flooding his mind, but the Apache leader was already walking back to the house. Inside, Gideon had heard everything. He looked at his son with something that might have been pride. "It's over then," Cassidy said. "The immediate threat?" "Yes," Gideon replied. "But Cassidy, you need to understand something. What you did bringing the Apache here, showing that strength, it changes everything. Other men will think twice before crossing us. But it also means we can never break faith with Natan's people. We're connected now. For better or worse." That night, as the camp settled in around the ranch, Cassidy stood outside and watched the fires burning in the darkness. 400 warriors, all here because his father had once pulled a drowning boy from a flood, because one act of courage years ago had created a bond stronger than fear. He thought about what his father said, about being connected, about debts that ran deeper than blood. And for the first time since this started, he felt something other than fear. He felt the weight of responsibility, of legacy, of understanding that some choices echo through time. On the fourth morning, Natan announced they would leave at dawn. The next day, Gideon was strong enough to stand now, strong enough to walk short distances without help. The immediate danger had passed, and the warriors needed to return to their families, their hunting grounds, their own lives. Cassidy felt a strange emptiness at the thought of them leaving. For 3 days, the ranch had been filled with their presence, their strength. When they left, it would feel very quiet. That evening, as the sun dropped toward the hills, Natan found Cassidy near the corral, tending to the horses. The Apache leader stood silent. For a moment, watching the boy work, then spoke. "Your father taught you well. I see his hands and how you move, how you care for things." Cassidy looked up, surprised. "He taught me everything I know. He taught you more than ranching." Natan leaned against the fence. "He taught you about debts, about honor. Most men your age wouldn't have had the courage to ride into Apache territory alone. Most wouldn't have known to come at all. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. Desperation without wisdom gets men killed. You had both." Natan paused, choosing his words carefully. "The man who died, the one who wanted this land. Do you know why he wanted it so badly?" Cassidy shook his head. Natan gestured toward the eastern hills where the creek ran down from the high ground. "Water. In 3 years, maybe 5, the territories will need water more than gold. Your father's land sits at the source of 3 creeks that feed into the valley. Control this land. Control the water for 100 ranches downstream." The dead man understood that. He was going to buy up everything. Charge people for what used to be free. Cassidy felt something cold settle in his chest. So it wasn't just about our ranch. It was never just about your ranch. You were the first. There would have been others. But now, because of what happened here, because those men ran instead of fought, the plan is finished. The dead man's partners will find easier prey elsewhere. How do you know all this? Natan smiled faintly. We watch. We listen. White men think we don't understand their schemes, their plans. They talk freely around us like we're stones or trees. They forget we have ears. They forget we pay attention. The two stood in silence for a while, watching the horses move lazily in the last light. Then Natan straightened, his tone shifting to something more formal. "When we leave tomorrow, you'll be alone again. Number 400 warriors watching your back. Some men might see that as weakness, as an opportunity, but you won't be alone. Not really. What happened here will be remembered. Stories will spread, and in those stories, people will learn that the Flynn family has friends who ride when called. That protection doesn't end just because we're not visible." Cassidy wanted to say thank you, wanted to express the gratitude that filled his chest, but the words felt too small for what he owed. Natan seemed to understand. He placed a hand briefly on Cassidy's shoulder, then walked away toward the campfires. Inside the house, Gideon sat by the window, watching the exchange. When Cassidy came in, his father gestured for him to sit. "What did he tell you?" Cassidy repeated the conversation, the revelation about the water, about the larger plan. Gideon nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I suspected something like that. Land this good, this well-watered. Men have killed for less." He looked at his son, his eyes serious. "Cassidy, what you did saved. More than just me. You saved this ranch, this legacy, but you also took on a responsibility. The Apache helped us because of an old debt, but now there's a new one between you and them, between us and Natan's people. Do you understand what that means?" Cassidy thought about it, about the weight of what his father was saying. "It means we honor them. We stand with them if they need us. More than that, it means we become the kind of men worthy of that trust." Gideon reached out and gripped his son's hand. "You became that kind of man when you rode into their territory alone. Now you have to stay that kind of man every day, for the rest of your life." Outside, the campfires burned lower as the warriors settled in for their last night at the Flynn Ranch. Tomorrow they would ride back to their own lands, back to their own lives. But something fundamental had changed here, something that couldn't be undone. A boy had faced impossible odds and won. And in winning, he'd learned that some victories come with a price. The price of becoming someone worthy of the help you received. Dawn came with the sound of horses being saddled and camp being broken. Cassidy stood beside his father near the house, watching as 400 Apache warriors prepared to leave. The efficiency was remarkable. Within an hour, all trace of their presence would be gone except for the trampled grass and the stories that would spread across the territory. Natan approached them one last time. Gideon had insisted on standing for this despite the pain it caused. The two men clasped forearms in the way of old friends. No words needed. Then Natan turned to Cassidy. "You rode alone into our territory. You asked for help when you had nothing to offer but your father's old debt. That took more courage than most men show in their entire lives." He paused, then removed a small stone from the leather pouch at his belt. It was smooth, worn by water, marked with a single carved line. "This belonged to my son, the one your father saved. He carried it until the day he died in battle 3 winters ago. I want you to have it." Cassidy took the stone, feeling its weight in his palm. "I don't understand." "You don't have to. Just know that when you look at it, you'll remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what must be done despite the fear. You understand that. Now." Natan placed his hand briefly on Cassidy's shoulder, then turned and walked to his horse. The warriors mounted and formed their lines. Natan raised his hand once in farewell, and then they rode 400 strong back toward their territory. Cassidy and Gideon watched until the last rider disappeared over the hills. The silence that followed was profound. "Well," Gideon said finally, his voice still rough, but stronger than had been days ago. "We've got work to do. That fence by the creek won't fix itself, and the horses need feeding." Cassidy looked at his father, saw the man who'd been beaten nearly to death, now standing straight, ready to continue. You should rest. You're not healed yet. I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now, I'm alive, and this ranch needs tending." Gideon started toward the corral, moving carefully but determined. Cassidy followed, but something had shifted. He found himself walking slightly ahead, opening the gate before his father reached it, checking the water trough without being asked. Small things, necessary things, the kind of things a man does when he understands his role. They worked through the morning, not talking much, just moving through the familiar rhythms of ranch work. By noon, Gideon needed to rest, and Cassidy helped him back to the house. As his father settled into the chair by the window, Cassidy brought him water and food. "You're different," Gideon observed, watching his son move with new purpose. "I had to grow up fast." "No, you were already grown. You just didn't know it yet." Gideon looked out the window toward the eastern hills. "What happened here, Cassidy? Word will spread. Men will know that this ranch is protected, that we have allies who will ride if called. That protection will last as long as we honor it." as long as we remember what it cost and what it means. Cassidy nodded, understanding settling into his bones. I won't forget. I know you won't. Gideon's hand found the stone Natan had given his son, turning it over slowly. This is yours. Now, this ranch, this legacy, the bonds we've built, all of it. I'll be here to guide you for as long as I can, but the responsibility is yours. You earned it when you rode alone into Apache territory. You proved it when you brought back an army to protect what matters. 3 weeks later, a rider came from the nearest settlement with news. Harlan Briggs and his men had been seen boarding a coach headed east. They'd sold their horses, their equipment, everything, and left the territory for good. The man who'd hired them was buried outside town, and his remaining partners had abandoned their plans entirely. The threat was over, not just delayed, not just postponed. Over. Cassidy stood in the yard of the Flynn ranch, watching the sunset paint the hills gold and red. His father was inside, nearly healed now, strong enough to work a full day again. The ranch was secure. The land was theirs, would remain theirs, protected by more than just fences and rifles, protected by honor, by respect, by bonds that transcended blood. He touched the stone in his pocket, felt its smooth weight, and thought about the journey that had brought him here. A terrified boy who'd watched his father beaten, a desperate son who'd ridden into dangerous territory with nothing but hope, a young man who'd brought back 400 warriors and learned what it meant to carry a legacy worth defending. The Flynn Ranch would stand, and Cassidy Flynn would make sure it stood for reasons that mattered not just because it was land or water or wealth, but because it represented something his father had taught him and the Apache had reinforced. That honor once given must be honored in return. That debts run deeper than gold, that some things are worth fighting for, and the fight never really ends. It just changes shape. He walked back toward the house as the last light faded, ready for whatever came next because he understood. Now, you don't win by being the strongest or the richest or the most feared. You win by being the kind of man who keeps his word, honors his debts, and stands firm when others would run. That was the legacy, and he would carry it forward. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and consequence collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.